The parking structure on the east side of the Warner Bros. Lot in Burbank, California, threw shade across stage 14 at exactly 2:30 in the afternoon on a Tuesday in the spring of 1982. Inside that stage, 41 members of a film crew had been working since 6 in the morning. The lights were hot. The air smelled of sawdust and machine oil, and the particular staleness that collects in large enclosed spaces when the doors have been shut too long. A rehearsal was in progress for a fight sequence that was scheduled to be filmed the following Thursday. The choreographer had marked the floor with colored tape. The stunt coordinator had walked the sequence 4 times before lunch. Everything was proceeding in the orderly fashion that professional film productions require when nothing has gone wrong yet. At the edge of the rehearsal space, seated in a folding chair with his back against a length of painted plywood, was a man in a white t-shirt and dark jeans. He had a paper cup of coffee balanced on his knee. He was not reading anything. He was not talking to anyone. He was watching the floor. The man standing at the center of the tape square was 29 years old, 6 feet 2 inches tall, and weighed 211 pounds at his last measurement. He had been cast in the film 3 weeks earlier on the strength of a screen test that had made the casting director stop the tape and watch it a second time. He had trained in Taekwondo for 11 years, had competed in 3 open tournaments, and had placed in the top 4 at each of them. He moved with the particular unhurried confidence of someone who has never been made to doubt the quality of his body's decisions. His name is not important to this story. What is important is what he chose to do with his confidence that afternoon. And what happened in the 9 seconds that followed. In 9 seconds, 41 people on that soundstage would stop whatever they were doing. The camera operator would lower his handheld rig to his hip and hold it there. The script supervisor would set her pencil flat on her clipboard without marking anything. The gaffer working the overhead rig would look down from the catwalk and not look away again for the remainder of the afternoon. None of them knew, when they came to work that morning, that they were going to witness something they would still be describing 30 years later. Nobody in that building knew who the man in the folding chair actually was. That was the last mistake anyone would make about him that day. If you have stayed with this channel before, you know that moments like this one do not arrive without a history behind them. The story of what happened on stage 14 that afternoon begins the same place all real stories begin, which is before anyone was ready for it to start. Before we get there, if you are watching this for the first time, consider subscribing now and leaving a comment telling us what country you are watching from. The community on this channel stretches across 4 continents, and it never gets old to see where the screen is lit up tonight. Subscribe now. We will wait. The action star had arrived on the Warner Bros. Lot 6 days before the incident with a professional reputation that preceded him the way weather precedes a storm system. He had appeared in 4 films in the previous 3 years. 2 of them had made money. 1 of them had made a great deal of money. The martial arts community in Los Angeles knew his work and respected his technique, which was genuine. His kicks were fast, precise, and trained into him through a decade of repetitive effort that deserved acknowledgement. He was not a fraud. This is important to understand. The story that follows is not a story about a man who did not know what he was doing. It is a story about a man who knew exactly what he was doing and chose to let that knowledge become a problem. He had met Chuck Norris once before, briefly, at an industry event 18 months earlier. The meeting lasted perhaps 4 minutes. He had been polite during those 4 minutes. He had been attentive. He had listened when Chuck spoke and had asked a reasonable question about training schedules. But something had shifted in the months between that meeting and the spring of 1982. He had become, in the way that some men become when early success arrives before complete formation, certain of his speed, certain of his ranking in any room he entered. Certain, specifically, that the generation of martial artists who had come before him had been working with a smaller toolbox than the one now available. He had said something to this effect during a brief conversation the previous Friday with 2 of the stunt performers on the production. He had not said it cruelly. He had said it the way men say things when they believe they are simply stating the observable truth. He said that the older generation of fighters had done remarkable things with limited information. He said the science had moved forward considerably. He said that speed and flexibility in a 29-year-old body was a different instrument than speed and flexibility in a man approaching 42. He said all of this while glancing toward the folding chair where the man in the white t-shirt was sitting. One of the stunt performers had looked at the floor when he said it. The other had looked at the ceiling. Neither of them had said anything in response. Because there are moments when the only responsible thing to say is nothing at all. On the afternoon of the incident, the rehearsal had been running for approximately 40 minutes. The choreographer was working through a sequence that involved a grab, a reversal, and a controlled strike to the midsection. The action star had performed the sequence correctly 3 times in succession. He was relaxed. He was, in the vocabulary of the physical performer, warmed up. He had that quality of readiness that athletes recognize in themselves and that sometimes in certain kinds of men slides past readiness into something else without the man noticing the transition. He stopped the rehearsal at a natural pause. He said something to the choreographer that caused the choreographer to nod and step back. Then he walked across the taped floor toward the folding chair at the edge of the space. He stopped 4 feet from where Chuck Norris was sitting. He said at a volume that carried to the nearest 6 or 7 people that he thought it might be useful to try the sequence against a real practitioner rather than the stunt double, and that he wondered if the man in the chair might want to stand up and work through it with him. The phrasing was careful. It was the phrasing of a man who understood that what he was proposing was outside the normal structure of the day, and who wanted to frame it as a practical suggestion rather than a challenge. But a room full of film professionals understood the proposal for what it was, which was a performance, and the audience for that performance was everyone standing within earshot. Chuck Norris set his paper cup on the floor beside the chair. He looked at it for a moment after he set it down, the way a man looks at something he has placed somewhere he does not intend to forget. Then he looked up. He said 2 words. He said, simply, "All right." He stood without pushing off the armrests. He did not roll his neck. He did not rotate his shoulders. He did not shake out his hands or perform any of the small preparatory rituals that signal readiness in a person who needs to announce it. He simply stood, and the standing was complete. He took his denim jacket from the back of the chair. He folded it once along the center seam. He set it on the seat of the folding chair with the same deliberate, unhurried attention a man gives to something he will pick up again in a few minutes. He walked to the edge of the taped square and stopped. The room had changed. It changes the same way every time, and the people who have witnessed it more than once describe the shift the same way each time they describe it. It is not a noise. It is the cessation of noise. It is the particular quiet of 41 people remembering simultaneously that they were not breathing. The script supervisor, a woman named Carol who had 22 years of production credits and who did not frighten easily, would say afterward that she had watched a great deal of professional martial arts in her career, and that she had never before seen stillness used as an argument. She said that the man at the edge of the tape was making a point before anything physical had occurred, and that the point was already winning. A stunt coordinator named Devereux, standing 11 feet to the left of the action, reached over and put his right hand on the shoulder of the man standing next to him and gripped it. He did not say anything. He did not release the grip for the next 4 minutes. The action star moved first. This was expected. Stillness, when deployed by someone who understands it, is not passivity. It is an invitation for the other man to spend energy. Chuck Norris had not moved in 14 seconds since he entered the taped square. The action star had been shifting his weight for all of them. He threw a lateral kick to the left side. It was fast. It was the fastest kick most of the people in that room had ever seen from a standing start in street clothes. It was not a slow kick. It was not a careless kick. It was the kick of a man who had thrown that technique perhaps 40,000 times since he was 18 years old and who knew precisely what it could do. It found nothing. Chuck Norris was no longer where it was going. He had moved perhaps 16 inches to his right. Not backwards. Sideways. The footwork was so compact and so late initiated that several of the witnesses would later disagree about whether they had seen it happen or whether they had simply observed the effect of it happening. The effect was that the kick passed through empty space, and the man who threw it was now completing a rotation that had been designed to end in contact. That is the first second. A fight is not the exchange of techniques. It is a conversation about where one man believes the other will be, and whether that belief is correct. The action star had spent 9 seconds in motion already, across an earlier half-hearted exchange, and in each of those seconds his body had offered information about its preferences, which side it favored, how it loaded before commitment, the particular micro-pause that preceded his best attacks. A man who has fought often enough learns to read this information the way other people read words. He does not think about the reading, he simply sees. The action star recovered his stance. He stepped in. He threw 2 rapid strikes, a left jab followed by a cross, both directed at the upper chest. Technically correct. Appropriately powered for a rehearsal context. Directed at exactly the area a trained fighter would direct them, neither of them landed. Chuck Norris rolled his shoulder twice, a gesture so minimal it was almost invisible, and both strikes deflected without a parry, without a block, without any motion that could be categorized as defensive. They simply ran out of target. The choreographer would say afterward that he had spent 20 years studying how to make film fights look real, and that he had just watched something real that did not look like anything he knew how to film. That is the second and third second. The action star paused, not from fatigue.
From the particular internal recalibration that happens when a man realizes that the model he has been using to understand a situation is insufficient. He was reassessing the distance. He was recalibrating the data. He was doing this quickly and professionally as a trained athlete does, but he was doing it, which meant that for 1.5 seconds.
The initiative belonged entirely to the man standing across from him. Chuck Norris did not take the initiative. He stood. He waited. He allowed the other man the time he needed to find himself, because what was about to happen required the other man to be fully present for it. That is the 4th and 5th second. The action star committed. He drove forward with a front kick, his strongest technique, the one he had used to close 4 competitive matches and which, by every technical measurement, was a serious and well-executed strike. He was moving at full conviction. He had decided. Chuck Norris stepped inside it. He did not go backwards. He did not go sideways. He went forward, into the kick, into the space between the launch and the extension, which is the one moment during which a kick cannot hurt anything because it has not yet become itself. He was inside the technique before the technique existed. His right forearm made contact with the action star's leading shin at an angle that redirected without meeting the force, and his left hand came to rest with open palm flat and controlled against the other man's sternum. He stopped there. The action star was off his base. His weight was distributed incorrectly for where his body now was. He had thrown his commitment forward and the forward was no longer available to receive it. He was, in the technical vocabulary of competitive fighting, finished. Chuck Norris had achieved the position from which every available option belonged to him. He did not use any of them. That is the 6th, 7th, 8th and 9th second. The room did not make a sound. The action star understood what had happened before anyone said anything. The understanding moved across his face in stages that the people watching described differently but agreed upon in sequence. First there was the physical recognition, the body's acknowledgement that it had lost its footing and its options simultaneously. Then there was the mental registration of what that meant. Then there was something harder to describe, which several witnesses called the look of a man arriving somewhere he had not planned to be. Chuck Norris lowered his left hand from the other man's sternum. He did not step back immediately. He held the position for the briefest moment, and in that moment he said something that no one standing more than 3 feet away could hear. The words were low and they were few, and they were directed entirely to the man in front of him. The action star's expression shifted when he heard them, in the specific direction that indicates the receipt of something that was offered, not imposed. Only 2 witnesses claimed to hear what was said. Their accounts were slightly different in wording but identical in substance. Chuck Norris said, "You are very fast, you should keep that." He stepped back then. He walked to the folding chair at the edge of the taped square. He picked up his denim jacket from the seat. He put it on without ceremony. He picked up the paper cup of coffee from the floor beside the chair and took 1 drink from it and set it back down. He sat. The action star stood in the center of the tape for a moment. Then he walked to the edge of the space in the direction of the choreographer and said something quiet and technical about the sequence they had been rehearsing. He returned to work. He did not look toward the folding chair again that afternoon. The stunt coordinator Devereux released the shoulder of the man standing next to him. He had not realized, until he released it, how hard he had been gripping. He looked at his hand for a moment, then looked at the catwalk above and nodded once at the gaffer, who nodded back. That exchange was the entirety of what the room said about what it had witnessed. They had all understood. Some things require no translation. The camera operator, a 34-year-old named Haskell, who had been working in film for 11 years, would say later that he had stood very still for approximately 30 seconds after it ended, and had then gone back to checking his lens mount. He said that he had done this because it seemed like the appropriate response to watching something that was over before it began. Conducted in a space where the light kept falling on the painted floor exactly as it had been falling before any of it happened. He said the indifference of the light to what had just occurred was the part of the memory that stayed with him the longest. The world continued exactly as it had been. The moment had happened inside a parenthesis that the world did not bother to open. The action star did not offer an apology that afternoon. He did not reference what had happened. He worked through the remainder of the rehearsal with full professionalism, and maintained that professionalism through the completion of the film 3 months later. Those who worked with him on the production would say that he was, if anything, quieter in the second half of the shoot than he had been in the first. One of the stunt performers who had been present for his remarks the previous Friday noted that the confident assessments of generational limitation were not repeated. Whether this constituted apology or simply the absence of a repeated error was a question the people on that production answered differently depending on the day you asked them. Chuck Norris completed his work on the film and left the production on schedule. He did not discuss the rehearsal incident in any contemporary interview. He did not mention it in any professional context during that period. The story moved instead the way such stories always move, which is through the people who were there, each of them carrying the version that their particular angle had given them, each version slightly different from the others, all of them converging on the same center. The choreographer told the story at a workshop in 1986 and was interrupted twice by the participants asking him to repeat the part about the footwork. He repeated it both times and said each time that he had not been able to make the sequence work on paper afterward, which was why he was describing it instead of drawing it. He said the movement existed in a category his notation system did not contain. The gaffer told the story at a retirement dinner in 1997, and finished it without embellishment. He said the reason he told it without embellishment was that embellishment would have made it smaller. He said the real version required no improvement, because it was already something he had not expected to see in his lifetime. The script supervisor Carol told the story once in 2004 to a group of film students in Vancouver who had asked her what was the most technically impressive thing she had ever observed on a production. She told it from beginning to end without being interrupted. When she finished, one of the students asked whether Chuck Norris had known who he was going to be asked to face that day. She said she did not know. She said she thought it probably did not matter. In 2009, the action star gave a long interview to a trade publication about the arc of his career. Near the end of the interview, the journalist asked him about the performers who had most shaped his understanding of the craft. He gave several names. One of them was Chuck Norris. He said, in the specific phrasing that the interviewer later quoted at length, that there was a period in his early career when he had confused information for understanding, and that the distinction between the two had been clarified for him in a single afternoon that he did not intend to describe in detail. The interviewer asked whether the clarification had been painful. The action star said it had been the most useful 9 seconds of his professional life. That is what honest accounting looks like: arriving late, offered without drama, carrying more weight for the waiting. The thing that stage taught no one who was present has spoken easily about is not the technique. The technique was extraordinary, but technique is ultimately a kind of vocabulary, and vocabulary can be studied and approximated and described. What the stage taught was something different. It taught that the quality of a man's knowledge announces itself not in the volume at which he discusses it, but in the economy with which he uses it when the moment asks. The action star was not unskilled. He was not slow. He was not pretending. He was, by the standards of his generation and his training, Remarkable, what he encountered was a man for whom remarkable was simply not the most relevant measurement in the room. There is a thing that happens to certainty when it meets someone who has earned the right not to be certain anymore. The certainty does not disappear immediately. It deflates, which is a slower and more instructive process. The man who carried it has time, in that deflation, to decide what he would like to replace it with. Some men replace it with resentment. Some men replace it with understanding. The choice between those two outcomes is not made at the moment of deflation. It is made in the weeks and months that follow. In the small decisions about how to carry the memory. The action star chose understanding. The evidence for this is in the record of his career, which continued to develop for another 15 years, and in the phrasing of his 2009 interview, and in the testimony of the colleagues who worked with him through the 80s, and who uniformly describe a man who became more collaborative and less declarative as time progressed. The 9 seconds on stage 14 did not make him smaller. They made him more accurate about the size of things. Next week, this channel will bring you the story of what happened one evening in a gymnasium in Canoga Park, California, in 1979, when a former Special Forces instructor with an undefeated competitive record of 31 matches decided to use Chuck Norris as a demonstration for 11 of his students. He had written Chuck's name on a chalkboard that morning as the example. By the time evening ended, he had erased the chalkboard entirely and sent his students home without the demonstration. What he said to them the following week is the part of the story that stayed with those 11 students for the rest of their careers. That episode arrives next week. Leave a comment below telling us what part of tonight's story you are still thinking about. The channel will read every one.